Hello out there in Guitar Moderne land. Today's interview is with Tim Motzer. Tim is a Philadelphia guitar player, a terrific guitar player who has played or collaborated with David Sylvian, David Torn, Vernon Reid, King Britt, and a host of others. He also has his own record label, 1K Records, on which he releases many of those collaborations as well as a lot of solo records. Recently, three in quick succession. So we will talk about that. We will talk about his touring with Ursula Rucker. We will talk about how he got into using pedals brilliantly the way he does in his solo performances and his collaborations, and many other things, probably not including Cabbages and Kings, but I hope you will enjoy the interview. Also, this time I would like to suggest that you go to the website and check out many, many more interviews there. There are video interviews, there are written interviews, there are gear reviews, there are guitar festivals. I do video festivals where I compile a number of videos of live performances by many different modern guitarists. And in this day and age, when we can't actually go to real festivals, you might really enjoy that. Also, I would hardly suggest that when you're on the page, that you click on my advertisements for Earthquaker devices and Red Panda. Both of these people have been with me for 2 or 3 years each, and I am truly grateful for their support of the site. So without further ado, here's my interview with Tim Motzer. Uh, yeah, so you've been a recording fool these days. You
Yeah.
have, or at least a releasing fool, because you have so many things that have come out. But first, I wanted to talk about that live performance that you did online.
Oh yeah.
Is that still available by any chance?
Well, I've been talking to Rob. Rob Palmer is the curator and the gentleman that runs Sound Cellar in Dorset, and we're talking about putting that back up and making it available again. So I think that's going to happen. And I don't know when yet. We're just going back and forth email, but I think pretty soon it'll be available, and I think it'll probably be available for maybe 3 or 4 weeks that you can, join in and check it out. So
Right.
yeah,
And it'll be a pay thing again?
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, there's something about, I think there's something about paying for a performance that makes it feel more like you're going to a performance. I mean, a lot of people are doing it. Mostly the prices are reasonable. I mean, Todd Rundgren's charging $35.
yeah. I saw that show.
You did?
Yeah,
Yeah. How was it?
it was good. It was Todd, Todd doing his review kind of in Chicago, and he had a full band. I could almost imagine him doing that set like in Las Vegas for a month or something like that, but instead he's beaming it out everywhere, and it was great. I mean, they really, you know, put on a great show with a tremendous amount of energy, and the sound was great. The visuals are cool, and it was just a kind of a new experience that everybody's starting to embrace now.
Yeah, well, it may be the future, and it's time to buy stock in those technologies, I think, if you're smart.
It's a good,
Uh, Yeah, what he's doing, I know, is tailoring each of those shows to the city. It's only available in a particular city at certain points. But how did you see you said you saw the Chicago show?
well, actually, it was the first night. I think it was Valentine. Yeah, it was Valentine's Day, and I think he had a geofence at one point, and I think they took that down at some point. Maybe I could be wrong because this was, I think it was the Buffalo show that I saw. So maybe that was part of the geofence, Philadelphia. But yeah,
Well, that wouldn't be surprising. I mean, they may have realized that, for something like that, first of all, his fans, they're practically deadheads, a lot of them, and they'd be happy to see they'd be happy to see more than one show and pay for more than one show to give them that opportunity. But getting back to your show, just musically, I don't know how much of it you remember, but at the beginning there were, and throughout, I think there are these high bleeping sounds that sounded kind of like almost like an octave echo thing
Yeah.
going on. How are you getting that?
Well, I'm deploying all kinds of ways to do that. I think you saw my pedal board back in Dino times in New York, and it
Maybe
really,
just go through it and and give an idea. I mean, just talk about it and give an idea what things do. So when people, if they watch the show again, they'll get some idea of where it's coming from.
yeah, it hasn't changed so much, but I think in terms of, right now, because of all the insane pedals that are coming out, I mean, I've never experienced this kind of saturation moment of so many interesting pedals coming out at once, and trying to figure them all out, and actually see what they'll do in terms of the kinds of expression that I'm trying to get into, and what I'm trying to do with my guitar. Normally I'm playing through an acoustic electric, and I've been doing that for so long, but I still occasionally will play my baritone Dan Electro or Strats at sometimes, or GNLs and things like that. But in terms of these octave echoes, there's a lot of different ways of doing that, and some of the ways that I've been doing that going back to the past is utilizing looping that you can change the speed. So sometimes I might be looping something at a low speed, and then just flip it up and go an octave higher or 2 octaves higher, and so you can get a lot of bleeps that way. But the pedal you're probably referring to is the Countdown to Five, I believe it's called, by the Montreal company, and I've been using that pedal since it came out. U Marsh turned me onto it, and that company. So that
Montreal
pedal,
Assembly, I think it is.
yeah, yeah, I'll show you the pedal. I mean, I think almost everybody has one of these at this point, because it's such an amazing pedal. But it's this guy.
Yeah.
Do you have this one?
No, I got a hold of one. I mean, I think at the time, one time I was thinking about doing it, they didn't even have them. They had like either run out of them or not,
Yeah,
suspended production for a while. I don't know if they're back in production. And now there's a number of alternatives that people are getting into, like the Tensor and the Red Panda Tensor and various Chase Bliss items that do similar things.
um, yeah. I've been dealing with all the Red Panda stuff, and all the Chase Bliss stuff, and I'm just looking around and seeing what else I have. But yeah, I think it's primarily those kinds of pedals, and the thing about them is the learning curve on these new pedals, at least for me, is it's vast, because all these pedals, especially the Chase Bliss, they have toggle switches on the back, so that gives you all kinds of other forms of control and expression, um, and using an expression pedal. So it's like it takes me quite a while to experiment with these pedals, and what ends up happening, just like this live show, is I'll turn on a switch, and you start kind of improvising with the pedal, because what's coming out of the pedal is random. I don't know what's going to happen, so then I respond to that. It's the same, almost the same as playing with another human being in a way, or at least that's what I'm trying to get to, where sounds are popping out that I don't know what's going to really happen. So that's why I like those pedals, because there's a form of randomness that's happening, and then I don't know what's going to happen, so that'll keep the music moving along. So that's kind of
Sure.
how I do that.
Yeah, that helps. I mean, Henry Kaiser started doing that, with his PC, one of his PCMs. He had a way that the delay would come back. I think kind of, it might have been a sample and hold thing, or all, where stuff would come back that he wasn't sure what it was going to be, so he would improvise with that. And a lot of
Yeah.
those pedals let you do that. As you mentioned, you've been playing acoustic for a long time now, plugged in acoustic. Just
Yeah.
you plug into all these pedals. And I don't know if we ever talked about why you like to do that as opposed to electric.
Well, it's really funny. Like if I pick up a Stratocaster in general, and I play a Strat, and I love Strats, and I have a bunch of them, but generally I will hear all the Stratocaster masters in my brain when I play, and I can, it's the sound of the guitar, and sometimes Jimmy's there, Jeff Beck is there, Robin Trower is there. Um, Adrian Belew is there. They all kind of show up, the whammy bar and all that. So I think, I was just really trying to find, my sound. And the thing that ended up happening was I got a gig with Ursula Rucker, who's an amazing poet from Philadelphia, and we toured for about 20 years around the world. And when that gig started, and she asked me to play, I was gonna just do acoustic guitar, acoustic electric guitar through maybe a few pedals, and then I quickly realized that there's no way that I can just do acoustic guitar, and poetry and vocalization. So I started building my pedal board, and the acoustic guitar. What would happen with looping capability is I could play beats off the top of the guitar and loop them up. And so that's what I started doing with Ursula is I could create beats, build bass lines, and build texture and architecture to support the song that we were doing. And then it would give me freedom to fly around and do orchestration and ornamentation of the music. So that's kind of how it started. And then also for the last 20 years, I've been composing and working with contemporary dance. And the same thing holds true there, where I have to create something that is beat oriented sometimes, not always. And again, the acoustic guitar, I can just play it into the looper. So that's one of the reasons. The strange thing is, I use a Takamine, which is here, and this guitar has seen some miles. It's been around the world, and you can see like all the wear and tear that that's having. But when I run this guitar through pedals, it takes on another life, and even its solo voice. I don't know what it is. It may be the pickup that's in that guitar, but it really identified in my brain like this sound is me. So I've stuck with it. It's become my main axe.
Yeah, so I've noticed. Although I did want to ask you, I saw I think one tour with Ursula or some. You were playing a Godin,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and was that a touring consideration? Like it was easier because it's more solid, or why didn't that stick?
Well, with that guitar, what I was doing when I added guitar synthesizer to that touring ensemble, um, then I was carrying two guitars, and getting on airplanes with two guitars on my back was not working out too well, And I had so many issues of even just getting the guitars on the plane back in those days. Um, so eventually made the decision I'm just going to use the Godin, and also that's what I do in Bandit 65. It's the Godin. So that guitar is still very much a part of what I'm doing, especially touring. It just makes more sense, and it's smaller, and then it can handle the guitar synthesizer stuff as well.
Right. Are you doing more guitar synthesizer stuff with Bandit 65 than in your own solo stuff?
Yeah, it's really strange. When Bandit 65 started and we were going to do our first tour, Gintas Janusonis, the drummer, he's like, Tim, you should definitely bring your guitar synth out on this. And I wasn't planning on it, but I'm glad I did because that's just such another world that I explore. But it seems to have thus far only showed up with Ursula and Bandit 65. And the GR33 is what I'm using, and I'm finding all kinds of amazing sounds now, like going back to it and reprogramming and seeing what's on the internal side of the GR33, what I can do to push it further, and then with all the effects and things that we can do, there's quite mm, quite an amazing sound world there, I think.
And now is the GR35 a non-MIDI one?
It has MIDI. It does, and I haven't used. I've thought about smaller modules and things like that, but I've never really used anything except the internal sounds, which is probably a mistake. I should probably check some other stuff, but with the amount of gear that I'm already carrying around, which is another issue, it's adding yet another piece is a lot to cart around. But here in the studio, anything's possible. That's for sure.
Are you running a laptop as part of your system?
No, I've never used a laptop sonically. I've only used it as a recorder. So if you ever see me on a gig and I have a laptop there, I'm just documenting the concert. But in the studio, it's a different consideration. If I'm producing a record or something, then I'll totally use everything that's available.
Right. Getting back to the acoustic for a minute, I was always curious, how do you deal with distortion when you're using the Takamine? First of all, do you have it stuffed at all so that it doesn't feed back? And or are you just playing a low enough volume that it's not feeding back uncontrollably?
No, I was just looking around the room because I have one of those rubber feedback controllers that you just put in the hole, and that seems to has worked pretty well for me.
And do you find certain overdrive and distortion pedals or fuzzes work better with an acoustic guitar than others?
Well, it's strange. I've been using this old Japanese Gaiatone for years. I don't know how many years now, maybe 20 years, but this is the pedal. And do you remember these at all? The Gaiatones? They're
I,
little
I,
Japanese
I remember
pedals.
there were lots of Gaiatone, you know, distortions out.
Yeah. So this is their overdrive, and I went into a music store one time before a tour, and I said, "What are your smallest pedals that you have?" And they were just laughing because they're like, "Dude, no one asks us what the smallest pedal is. They want to know what the best sounding pedal is." I said, "Yeah, I know, but usually, with a delay pedal or an overdrive pedal, um, they're decent. So I just want to check them out because I'm trying to make a small board." So I found that Gaiatone, and that particular overdrive seemed to work really well with the acoustic electric guitar. And so I ended up when Gaiatone, I don't know if they're still around or if they just don't make these anymore, but I ended up buying a couple more just to have spares at this point, because it's really an identifiable sound. And I've been experimenting with different fuzzes with the guitar. They all seem to work in their own way. Um, Totally different with magnetic pickups, though, of course, with a single coil Strat or humbucker or something like that. But still, they have a particular quality that I work on with the fuzz. And I use the Zvex Fuzz Factory for quite a while. And David Torn gave me one of his pedals, which I use also. And I just got the Black Spiral by Tom Cram. That's really nice, and that works really well. That's a great fuzz pedal. I'm really enjoying that.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a guy, Monty, somebody out of Texas that toured for years doing like Eric Johnson type solos on an acoustic guitar. So
Ah,
it's obviously possible, and you got a great sound on the show. I noticed you were doing some long Fripp-like loops that would fade out. Um, what are you using for looping? Are you using more than one, or are you fading with an expression pedal?
all of the above. I have a lot of pedals that do looping. Of course, the new Chase Bliss blooper is on the board at the moment. Before that, I had the TC Electronics 2X, and before that, it was the DL4. And the DL4 was the unit that I probably used the most for a long time. Once I found that, I just found it was such an intuitive pedal, except that it was I used two of them, and they're like boat anchors in terms of weight. So traveling with those was kind of a pain. So that's why I changed to the TC. And when the blooper came out, I was like, well, that sounds like that could be really nice, and certainly its footprint is way smaller. So so that's up, and I've been learning that, experimenting with this pedal here in the studio and live, and so I'm using that, and I've always used the Pigtronics Infinity, which is at my feet here, and that's like a double looper, and yeah, those are the only loopers I'm using at the moment. I think you could consider the Bliss Mood a looper as well. It does like short little loops, and also the Countdown to Five does some looping. So there's all kinds of possibilities with little loopers and taking snatches of audio sound that's going through them. And you know, a lot of these new pedals, the particles and things like that, they all do kind of glitchy things with utilizing looping. So experimenting with that, but also the interaction of loopers.
Right. You're not doing, I mean, you're not doing many rhythmic loops. It's mostly ambient type things.
It depends. It depends on the context. I will do rhythmic loops. In fact, did I do any rhythmic loops in the Dorset show? I'm trying to think.
Well, I guess when you start adding percussion, you know, that would have to be a rhythmic timed loop, which I was
Yeah.
going to ask you about. Do you have a kind of a concept that you use to when you're creating a piece, like improvising a piece? And well, I guess I should ask you, was what you're playing improvised, or is there it was improvised. So do you have an arc, like sort of like Wes Montgomery used to play single lines and then play octaves and then play chords? Do you start with a certain thing and then move to something else and then, you know, maybe add certain effects and then add a percussion for the climax and then maybe a denouement after that?
Yeah, you could say that. I never know really what's going to happen when I'm improvising, and because it's so in the moment, there's no plan, and it's usually like wherever I am in the music at that moment in time will dictate like what happens, you know. So I don't even know, and as far as the arc, I think the arc just takes its a natural form. I'm not trying to necessarily go anywhere in particular. I'm just trying to listen to the music and let it flow and let it happen. Trying to get the brain, you know, not on and just be totally in the zone when that's happening. So, as much as I can be in that space, that'll dictate how the music opens up. But yeah, I think normally at some point there will be a percussion area, you know, that I'll finally get to, and you know, continue improvising on top of that and mutating, always trying to mutate everything and get to an orchestral place eventually. I'm not really trying to. I mean, my strategy isn't wanting to solo per se um, until maybe this structure happens. That's wow, it's just speaking to a nice form or something that's materialized, and then I want to investigate it, you know, by soloing or melodically going through it and seeing what's in there, and try to uncover things, but still in the state of grace in a way, you know, where you're not trying to make it happen, you're just flowing through it. So that's kind of what I'm doing.
That's always the goal. Well, speaking of soloing, at one point it sounded like you were had an octave solo going on. Was that something like a Pog?
Um, I use well, I've always used the whammy pedal, so it was probably that, I would assume. That's some of the solo voices I'll use is I'll flip through different octaves of the whammy pedal, and I also have been using the eventides for a long time. So I have three eventides sitting at the top of the board, and they all have different octave patches and harmonizer patches, things like that, where I can get two or three notes out of one note.
You're talking the H9?
Yeah, I have the H9, and I also have what is this one called? I don't even remember what this one's called.
There's the
But
factor series, pitch factor, mod
yeah, it's
factor.
the pitch factor. I've forgotten what they're called even.
Yeah, they're old at this point. They've been around a long time.
I know.
Do you know Mike Baguetta?
What's that?
You know Mike Baguetta?
I don't.
He's a great guitar player. He uses, I think he uses their delay looper. He uses just the looper and he has it up on a stand. And because he says that one is the only one where you can do things like the old Oberheim, and he can do things with that. He talks about, we did an interview and he talks about it. He can do things with that you can't do with any other looper in terms of.
I think these old Eventides are just extraordinary, and that's why they're still on this board, even though the H9 has shown up. And I think the H9 is stellar as well. But there's something about the older units to my ear. Um, I think they sound better to some degree. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's how I feel about them.
It's that vintage digital thing.
I think so.
Um, so I'm curious about the broadcasting. Were you playing through amps that you had mic'd, or were you going direct?
For that gig, I went stereo direct, and you know, I basically through my chain. I've been experimenting with different things, but through my chain, my last pedal is Space by Eventide, and I take a stereo feed out of that, and that goes to my interface, um, and then the interface goes out into the laptop and on, and so that's the way that's going. But I've also been experimenting with this Digitech Cab Drive VR, which is a dual cabinet simulator. But I'm finding that probably works better for like if I was just cutting like Stratocasters or something or Tellies, and not acoustic electric, and not even in the way that I use it, because I feel like it works more like a guitar amp, which is a sound we love because it pulls everything into focus, so to speak. But when I'm going direct out, then it's all the frequencies are showing up. So I think that works better, especially when you're using sub octaves and things like that.
I,
But
I think you're right. It does work for that kind of stuff. Where it occasionally is problematic is with things like distortion and fuzz.
yeah,
And so do you have a trick for warming that up so it doesn't sound like a fuzz going in direct into the board?
yeah. What I do when I tour is I always have another amp on stage, so I'm actually going direct out as well as miking up an amp, and that solves the problem. And I leave the challenge to the front of house mixing person to blend those in a pleasing way. And I usually, lean 50-50, and maybe depending on the song, they can lean into whatever they want to do. So, sometimes depending on the context in the studio, I have a bunch of little amps down here that I mic up as well. So, um, given what I'm trying to do, the amps really, help a lot. And so it's the blending, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. It
Right.
seems.
Yeah. The other thing I have to ask you about, I heard you doing an interview with somebody, I can't remember where, and if I was aware of it, I had forgotten that you played on the Nine Horses record. And
Yeah.
if there's a couple of gigs, guitar gigs that would be dream gigs, one is playing with Joni Mitchell and one
Oh
would be
yeah.
playing with David Sylvian.
Yeah.
But did you actually play with him at any point, or was that was all overdubbed?
Yeah, Nine Horses, that's an amazing story, by the way. But Nine Horses was more or less a file share album. And the way I got involved was I was working with Bernd Friedman and Jackie Liebezeit. And I met Bernd in Cologne. I think it was 2003, it could be 2002. And I expressed the interest in collaborating with him. And so we kind of were emailing back and forth for quite a while. And the second time I went to Cologne, which was maybe about 8 months later, he came out to the show and he's like, now would be a great time to collaborate and Jackie Liebezeit's going to be involved. So, long story short, he sent me maybe about 10 songs that I overdubbed on in my studio and sent them back to him. And he just loved everything and basically mixed the record that was going to be a Secret Rhythms album, uh, Friedman Liebezeit. And apparently, David Sylvian came into Cologne and they met up, and he called Bernd and said, "I'd really like to collaborate with you." And Bernd said, "Well, I have these tracks that I just have done mixes on, and you want to write to these?" And David said yes. So that's how that album actually started. And so yeah, David got all of my files, and that was an interesting thing too, because um, Burnt mixed the original album, and David really wasn't feeling it so much, and he wanted to take control of it. So what ended up happening was Jackie Liebezeit's drums got taken off that record, and David's brothers' drums got put on, and they also straightened out the time signatures from the odd times to more like 4/4 and 3/4 times. So it was pretty interesting ride to see how Nine Horses actually finished up. But there is a version of the original instrumentals from Bernd Friedman and Jackie Liebezeit that I play on called Secret Rhythms 2. And David sings on one song called The Librarian on that. So you get an inkling of what the original idea was for the record if you listen to that.
Is that on Spotify?
I'm not sure it's on Spotify. It could be, but it's definitely on Bandcamp. If you look up Friedman Liebezeit, it should be under that, I think. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely worthwhile checking that one out.
It's a great record. I mean, David Sylvian is amazing. He can, I say he could sing he could write a song to a fire engine going by. I mean,
Hasn't he done that?
uh, he will if he hasn't. I mean, do you know the Blemish record
Oh yeah,
with Derek Bailey playing, and
yeah,
it's just amazing what he comes up with. So I am kind of I'm not even sure how many recordings you've released in the last month or so, because I think you sent me at least three, but
yeah. The three that I sent you were all done during the first wave of lockdown. I think I'm trying to think of the months. March and April, I think, is where those three come from, and one is called Inside, and one is called The Great Expanse, and
and
the
tear
third one is
aside the
called,
veils.
yeah, Tear Aside the Veil, yeah. And yeah, those were all done down here doing live broadcasts. I have this isolation broadcast thing that I do randomly, and I'll just go online and play, usually late at night. But I always record everything, and when I come back to it and check it out, I see like, oh, this is actually pretty happening, or it meant something, or it felt, I felt something there, and so that's what the basis of those recordings are. And like the Great Expanse is super dark. I think, I was feeling pretty in a very strange way that day, but I thought it was worthwhile to release it. But generally, I'm trying to release things that hopefully make you feel good. But even the darkness, I think sometimes can help.
Yeah, it's cathartic. I just read some woman or heard someone talking about how like she's been watching on Netflix, the Richard Ramirez serial killer series because that's making her feel good for some. So whatever gets you through the night, as John Lennon said.
Yes.
On Lament, on I think Lament on Inside is I can't tell from my notes if that's a song or if that's the song name with the title, but it sounds like there's a bowed acoustic in the background.
Yeah. It's that was from a live concert actually in Ardmore, Pennsylvania, at a place called the Living Room, and I did a solo night there, and that piece materialized in front of an audience, and it was all bowing. The whole piece was bowing, and I was looping to kind of build up the loop and making it, it started to take on like a string ensemble feeling for me. And I still remember that moment. It was striking to me for some reason, and I almost lost it on stage. It was very emotional, and I don't know where that came from. That feeling, it just came through. And when I made Inside, I was like, I think I want to put this on because there's something to that piece. Yeah,
That's what we all hope for. I'm trying to channel directly the emotion directly through what we're doing.
yeah.
On Hal and John, your tribute to John Prine and Hal Wilner, it sounds like Spectral sounds on that. Yeah, I don't know if you're familiar with spectral processing. There was a great suite of plugins by this guy, Michael, somebody, that came out, a free suite of spectral plugins years ago. And they sounded great. And, as time went on, he never supported them after that. So they would crash more and more as systems upgraded. But I still have them, and occasionally I'll pull one out. But where my familiarity with spectral, what I consider spectral, you know, uh, effects comes from, and that's what it sounds like to me. But what is that exactly? Because it sounds very different from that everything else you were doing.
That's a strange one. I mean, that 30-minute piece, first of all, it's like, I'm pretty sure that was near the end of one of the isolation broadcasts that showed up. And that particular night, I had been thinking about those two guys. But beyond them, I was just thinking about pretty much everybody that seemed to be passing at that time, all the amazing jazz artists and stuff. And I think I clued in on them because it was like the straw that broke the camel's back. Those two guys went in the same day, and I was like, wow, this is a crazy fucking time, right? And so, being down here and playing, that showed up, and I was thinking about those guys and just thinking about everybody and what was going on, and same pedal board, same setup that I always use. I don't even know what really was happening because I think it was, and I'm trying to remember what was on my board at the time, but it's something about how these pedals were interacting with one another, and I heard it happening, and I really was trying to keep that thing going on, and I just let the music take me downstream, so to speak. And it was kind of like really improvising with the pedals, tweaking, looping, disintegrating, mutating, um, all the way through for 30 minutes. And um, I really can't tell you too much more than that because, it was just,
Yeah, now that you mention that, it actually makes sense that given all the things that you've said you're using, it could easily create phasing relationships that would
yeah,
give it that spectral sound. If something has a certain length of delay and something has another length of delay, and you got this length of delay rubbing up against that length of delay, and if they're short enough, it could start doing some sort of phasing intermodulation, which is what a lot of spectral effects sound like. So I was curious about that. And did you mention where was Terra Side the Veils recorded, or how was that recorded?
the same. It was one of the isolation broadcast concerts, and it was recorded here in my studio with the same setup as all three um, albums. And yeah, it was just an in the moment improvisation that went down. And I just felt, again, they're all different. And I felt like that one had a lot of hope. It was, about standing strong, stay forward, stay focused on continuing and keep moving. That's what that record's about. And I was happy with that. I felt like there was some new language that showed up there too. And I think that's what I'm most interested in right now is trying to find some new language. It's like we all play guitars, we all have pedals and stuff, but how do we get to a new place? And when I start hearing some new areas, it's like, this feels good, and you feel like there's an evolution going on.
Yeah, I think it helps to that you're, accessing the emotion of the moment, will lead you to new places. Because and that was one thing that struck me about those three records is, you're using virtually the same guitar, the same pedals, even though you have a wide palette of pedals. But the danger with that is they could all end up sounding the same. I mean, that's something I struggle with is every time I plug in, it's like, well, yeah, I know how all this stuff works, and I end up at the same place every time. And
Yeah.
I mean, part of it is, yeah, that's what I like to hear. So that's where I end up. But to push yourself and not just change for the random sake of changing, but change as a response to your feelings in the moment, that's
Yeah.
how you maintain, I think, how you maintain your sound, but still have different, have each record sound different and sit in a different place.
Yeah, I mean, every day's a new day. I know I feel different every single day. It's so interesting. And some days we're real low, some days we're high, some days we're in the middle, some days I don't feel like doing anything. But we always want to do something, and when it strikes, we need to play and do that. Actually, we need to always play. It always makes you feel better. But I wanted to get back to what you were saying about the same pedals and all this stuff. It's kind of like I'm trying to express the idea. It's being who you are, expressing yourself, but it's also somehow like not trying to do anything. It's like you're plugging in and you're turning these pedals on and stuff, but it's kind of like there's a real listening going on, and you're being affected by that and seeing how you can push that forward, but without without thinking. It has to be. I know that as soon as I start thinking about anything, the music is gone. Um, if I lose my concentration, it's the same in yoga. Like if you're in the midst of a yoga pose or something and you start thinking about taxes or something, it's like you're not there. So it's the idea of being present so much that everything else is gone. Those are the moments I always try to capture, and I usually know when I'm in them. But now I just start the recorder and improvise for an hour and see what happens, and hopefully I'll get to that zone. And when I do, usually that's the kind of output that happens where I'm just so involved with the sound, not trying to make it into anything, but just allowing it to happen. Those are the kinds of things that, like, oh, this feels good. This is the right stuff. And it's the same with Bandit 65 too. When we're playing live, I can tell if any of us are thinking, it's still cool. But when we're all gone, I think we're opening everybody's chakras at that time.
We should mention that Band of 65 is the band you have with Kurt Rosenwinkel. And it's a another pure improvisation project. That's pretty amazing. Kind of what you're talking about is what people talk about as the flow,
Yeah.
and when you get there, and I think most people have experienced it to a greater or lesser degree, is when you're in that moment, the world disappears. I know I'll start, and I'll look up and it's a half an hour or 45 minutes later.
Yes.
If you're not thinking about anything, you're just responding, going and responding and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, partly what I'm interested apart from that is we all try and do that, but how people end up sounding like themselves,
Yeah.
and I think that's an integral part of it because you're not once you start thinking about it, then you start trying, well, I want it to sound like so and so, or I want it to sound like this person, or I want it to sound, and I want to be like this guy, or something. And if I mean, my theory of having your own voice is that it should be the easiest thing in the world because we're all different people, and you are you, I'm me, and as long as we follow that, I mean, just what I was saying about it, we all use the same pedals. I mean, partly because of what you were saying, these pedals are so deep, is that
Yeah.
there's a lot of room for individuation on it. I mean, I've rejected certain pedals like the Zen Drive because I plug in a Zen Drive, I sound like Robin Ford. everybody sounds like Robin Ford. I don't want to sound like Robin Ford. You
That's
know,
right. Yeah.
it's great that it does that, but I don't want that. I mean, I like jetter overdrive pedals because, as opposed to say exotic, you plug into exotic stuff, you sound like an LA session guy.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, but the jetter pedals I find are very transparent in this, not in the sense that people usually say transparent, but they're transparent in the sense, they're very dynamic, they're not compressed. So everything about the way I play comes through and I end up sounding like me. So it's great to have gear that does that.
Yeah.
But it's also a question of just relaxing into who you are,
Yeah.
and and which it sounds like you do. It's just you pick the sounds that you like personally, not the sounds that you think, oh, this is the cool sound for now, or this is the hip sound of the moment. You're searching for the sounds that are affecting you and moving you, and they're
That's
not
right.
going to affect somebody else the same way and move them the same way. So you end up with your sound.
Yeah. And just moving on with that, or it's like I love this topic, this area of discussion, because I spoke to this saxophonist yesterday in the park who's a good friend of mine, and I hadn't seen him in a year, and we talked about this very subject. And with jazz players in general, jazz schools, and you have jazz clubs, and everybody's playing 50s and 60s jazz, and there's a real responsibility to play like Charlie Parker or Coltrane, or know all these tunes and have transcribed all the solos, and that's all part of being a jazz musician, of course. But the fundamental idea is, who are you? you know, and that's what we're all trying to get to, hopefully. And if we're trying to sound like Jimmy Page or someone else, it's not who you are. You can be inspired by those people, but the key is, how do you find yourself? And we just have to be ourselves, and like when I play in the jazz scene in Philly, I can't be anybody except me in that form. So when I made that breakthrough, in a sense of that, I don't have to become a bebop guy tonight, I can just play the tunes the way I do. That was a huge breakthrough for me. And then I realized, now just be yourself in any situation you want to be. And that seemed to really help me out a lot. And also talking to this jazz saxophone player, he was just like, yeah, I always wanted to do this other thing, but I never can because I'm always stuck in the jazz box. And I'm like, well, you should do that other thing. And it's the thing I've also noticed from meeting some of these English musicians is, they're such great musicians and great artists, and then you realize that the only music they can really play is their music.
Exactly.
Really.
Well,
you
that's
know,
because they start, it's funny, they've always started with a concept. They
yeah,
start with a concept and then learn how to play that concept. And that's
yeah,
one reason the bands have always been so successful, is
yeah,
because they, you know, the, that makes them very easy to sell. When you have a concept, that's a starting point for selling something. It's a sound, it's a voice. And so that's one reason they've been successful. American bands start by just learning to play, and if they're lucky, they arrive at a sound. But it's funny you mentioned saxophones. I mean, in the old days in bebop, the thing is, if you got on the stand and you sounded like Charlie Parker, they threw you off the stand. You were expected to develop your own voice, and that's why
yeah,
you had a Coltrane who sounded like one thing, and Lee Konitz sounded like something else, and Coleman Hawkins sounded
yeah,
like something else, and everybody was expected to have their own voice, because if you
yeah.
sound like something else, whereas at a certain point, everybody wanted to sound like Stevie Ray Vaughan and got rewarded for that, and
Yes.
and that's not a road to developing. But I mean, this is a subject I've been thinking about, actually writing a book about it, because a big part of it is courage, a certain kind of courage.
I
you
agree.
you get a certain reward for sounding like somebody who's already famous and already well respected and already known. The more you sound like them, the more people think, oh, you're really good because you sound just like this guy is really good. If you sound like yourself, most people, they don't know if you're any good. You know, they
It's
have to decide for themselves.
it's really true. And you know, it's like my friend Barry, who's in. I have a band called Orion Tango, and he's the bass player. And you know, again, even in that band, I'm always exploring stuff, but it's more in a progressive rock or power trio area. But we're really trying to push the envelope always. And he's like, Tim, you should blow some major solos every once in a while and let people know that you can play like that. He goes, you know, kind of like Hendrix Band of Gypsies, just throw some of that shit in there, you know, and but do it your way, you know, and sometimes that'll happen, and it's really true. The audience will be like, whoa, you know. Sometimes the experimental stuff or the more abstract stuff doesn't connect, but the blues always will, you know.
Yeah. And there's a trick to that too. It's fascinating. When I was touring with James Armstrong, you know, playing blues every night,
Yeah,
I would take solos, and there would be the solos that I would play where the guys in the band would look at me like, yeah, that was really cool. And out in the audience would be crickets, you know. And then there were the solos where I'd pull out all the cliches, you know, and I could barely look at myself in the mirror afterwards, but the audience would go nuts. And then there were the nights where I would find that sweet spot where I could play a solo that I respected, the guys in the band respected, but somehow reached out to the audience as well. And
that's the one.
that's the one. That's the thing. Because otherwise it's kind of insular. You know, I
Yeah,
mean, great if your, you know, bandmates like it and you like it, but you know, theoretically we're trying to communicate to people who aren't
absolutely.
musicians. But to be able to have that kind of sophistication that feeds you and feeds, you know, the people you're playing with, and still, you know, reaches people who are not musicians, that's the goal. I mean, there's, you know, there's some people do you know Ivan Arset? Do you know, are you
Oh yeah,
familiar? Yeah. I
yeah,
mean, they did a concert not too long ago, you know, it was a pay concert, live concert. On it wasn't live, it was, you know, pre-recorded, but
yeah, yeah.
at a certain time. And it was great. I hadn't seen him, you know, with something new in a long time, but I've seen them a couple of times, and they straddle that line pretty well. I mean, they're doing interesting, vaguely avant-garde stuff, but every now and then he'll rip one off in his own style that shows you, oh yeah, this guy can burn, shred, choose your
Yeah. Every
it,
once in a while, I think you have to do that stuff. You know, it's a solo voice, you know, and it's part of who we are as well. So you know, it comes out. I think Barry, what he was really trying to tell me is like, be everything you are. Don't just be a segment of something, but bring it all to the table. Everything that you know, everything that's in you, use all of it somehow, and that becomes your voice too.
that's interesting you mentioned that, because and especially vis-a-vis like talking about Ivan and Scandinavian, that whole Scandinavian scene is all about that. Is
Yeah,
they don't reject anything, you know, whereas you'll see, I mean, I see all too many guys doing avant-garde stuff where it's like, oh no, I can't play a melody. Oh no, I can't play a beat. Oh no, I can't play any two notes together that really should go together, you know, because otherwise it's not free, it's not avant-garde. And no, it's music. You're playing,
yeah.
ultimately you're playing music,
So,
and it's nice to, you know, and it's you put it very well too. It's like be all everything you are. If you're cutting off parts of who you are, um that's not good either. It's interesting, I'm doing this Guitar Moderne thing. A lot of the players that I talk to and I've followed, a lot of them grew up and went through the whole bebop thing. I mean, they can
yeah,
play all that stuff,
yeah,
and they've kind of tossed it aside in favor of, you know, noise or a style that, you know, doesn't do that. I mean,
yeah.
there's, you know, well, Rafik Bhatia, you know him?
I don't think so.
Oh man, that was the best show at Big Ears. The last time they actually had Big Ears was his band, and you know, he's one of those guys who he can play
Anything.
anything, but he's developed this style at, you know, a lot of laptop, a lot of
All right.
you know, just a lot of sounds you've never really heard before and style. So it's really cool. And there's other guys like that who have gone through all that. And that's another discussion occasionally I have with people. It's like there are people who develop a really unique voice who have not gone through that and are fascinating, to listen to. And but it's a question of, is there more depth in somebody who has all that knowledge and then reaches, that plays free or avant-garde or does sounds and noise, is that going to be better than someone who just gets there kind of primitively? Um,
The primitive is very pure. I think of John Lee Hooker, you know,
yeah,
and some of those guys, and it's just like that stuff still slays me to this day. Makes me jump up and down when I hear um, that stuff and recorded in those studios in the '50s, and it's just like, damn, man, that is it, But I think everybody probably has their own path, and some are born with the thing that'll be them their whole life, maybe, and other people go out and explore and learn bits and pieces. Obviously, there's something there, inside, but sometimes you just have to flip over a lot of rocks and see see where it is, and it might start making sense later on in life. I just thinking of my own journey. Probably started more as a rock guy, but then listening to jazz and jazz fusion in the '70s and moving forward. And I used to compartmentalize all that stuff, and I think there were a lot of players that did that. Like, okay, I'm going to be a jazz guy now. Now I'm a rock guy. Now I'm an acoustic guy. So eventually, blending all that stuff together and discarding all the rules that are only in your head because somehow we always box things out. Even if I'm called for a jazz gig in Philly, I'm like, I don't know if I want to do this. Am I good enough to do this? And I am, but it's like the thing that always perplexed me was the approach. Can I be who I am within this, or do I need to be Joe Pass or someone?
well, I mean, Frizzell went through
Can't
that.
be.
I mean, Frizzell was a bebop snob for a long time, or for a while with the arch top when he first started, Bill,
Oh
you know,
yeah,
but then he saw this guy, Mike Miller, play an arch top, but had it cranked and was playing rock on it. And he, that was kind of an epiphany for him. And he realized, well, wait, I play rock. I played rock, that's what I grew up with. And
yeah,
now I'm playing jazz, but wait, you don't have to separate them. And that was that whole era really with him and Schofield and Abercrombie and,
yeah,
a whole bunch of guys who came up playing rock and appreciating rock who
yeah,
then learned all the bebop stuff and all that kind of stuff. And
yeah,
but felt that there was no reason that they had to do one or the other. They could put it together. So in that sense, on a cultural level, that ship sailed back then and has continued,
yeah,
but obviously not continue for a lot of these guys that just stay with arch top guitars and play. Had somebody put it, Coltrane lick, diminished scale Parker lick, Coltrane lick, diminished scale Parker lick. But for most of the people we're talking about and that we're into and that we're fans of, they have come to the point where they do incorporate everything. And it's funny, you mentioned your journey. That was going to be my next question. How do you feel like your playing is developing at this point?
Well, it's really interesting. I have to say for me that one of the areas that has helped my playing evolve so much is working with dance, because I've been doing it for, especially a lot in the last 10 years, but I've been doing it for 20 years and working with a visual element, a motion element, and having to create improvisations with the dancers on the spot, or be given a time signature or something like, this is in 7, ready, and they start counting it off, and I've got to find something right in that moment, through using this guitar that I have, and using things like clips on the strings, and none of this is new, or bows or anything, But it just made me jump in and try to find new sounds on my acoustic electric guitar and things to help create and develop compositions for dance. And that's when I think my voice really started moving forward and out of the norm, so to speak. So that was a big part of it, and that just kind of continues. The journey now is, yeah, the exploration. It's like hiking in a mountainous wood that you've never been in, and it's like, but in a sonic way, and like trying to explore and find some places that are new that you haven't heard. And I have a huge record collection that I've listened to my whole life, and it's like I'm looking for sounds that aren't on the record collection. Basically, it's like, and it's built on the foundation of what I've developed up to this point. I guess is maybe a way to answer that.
Well, that's interesting that you mentioned that because I've been getting into photography lately
Yeah.
and buying all these photography books, and I'm looking at those, and I'm realizing, okay, that's one more picture I can't take because it's been done, to death, and Wayne Krantz once said something like that. He said, whenever he hears a great guitar player, a great musician, he goes, great, that's one more thing I don't have to do.
Yeah.
And so, but it is the trick. I mean, I don't know about you, but I find that you find new stuff sometimes through accidents. That's you
Always.
you'll find you play, you screw up and you make a mistake, or as you say, something will come out that you didn't expect, and you go, wait, I like that, I'm going to incorporate that in the future into what I do.
Yeah, and sometimes when you're improvising, these accidents happen, and maybe they'll become something, or maybe you'll take note of it. But what I'm also finding within this journey of improvisation is that these things don't come up again half the time. It's like I don't know that I'll ever get back to, you know, a tune like Hal and John, that vibe, because I don't know what happened. I really, really don't. It was a moment, and but nevertheless, it's kind of improvising and knowing that there is a lot of stuff out there if you can tune your mind to it.
Cool. Well, let's talk about your what do I call it? Insta views, Instagram interviews.
Oh yeah,
For a minute. You've been doing some great ones with David Torn, and I'm looking forward to watching the Dino one. I mean, that's 2 hour stretch, but I've been
it's a
getting
long
up.
one.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's fascinating because he's a fascinating guy, and
He's great.
I get up earlier and earlier these days, so I have more time to do that. So I'll look forward to that. Is anybody coming up that you can talk about?
Well, tomorrow I'm doing one with poet Ursula Rucker, who we've collaborated since I don't know, like I think 2000, and I was in a band called Silk 130 with King Britt back around '97, and she did some poetry on that record. And when we toured, she didn't do the tour with us, but she played in Philly with us, just the hometown show, and that's when I first met her, and we kind of kept in touch. And next thing I know, we're opening for Nina Simone at the Tower Theater, and that's how we started. That was our first gig, and then we just toured the world for about 18 years, and she's astounding, and we have this special collaboration. And I would say that a lot of how I play also was developed on the road with her, with the looping and the duo thing with just voice and guitar, but having to expand the guitar out. A lot of that happened there on the fly, and probably before a lot of people were looping. It was people hadn't caught up with that concept yet. It was coming, but so I think back then we were a pretty amazing duo. Still are if we do some more gigs, I'd say.
Yeah, I've seen some videos. It is pretty amazing. And at various points, you had other musicians with you as
Yeah.
well. You're doing stuff. Um, you also did one with Kurt Rosenwinkel, which I urge people to check out. And any other guitar players coming up on your wish list?
I have a huge list of people, and I'm gonna definitely branch out and not only do guitarists and stuff like that. I did one with Rob Fetters also, who's a great guitar player that played with the band The Bears with
Okay.
Adrian Belew. And we were good buds in Cincinnati when I lived in Ohio back in the day, and so we've stayed in touch. And Rob's doing great stuff, and yeah, so I have a large list of people, and I'm slowly reaching out to people, and we'll see who comes on after this one.
Well, great. So I'd recommend people subscribe to your Instagram. I guess that's the best way to learn about the
Well, I've
ones.
just moved it off of Instagram now
Oh,
because I
so
was
then
having all kinds of issues, lots of glitching and losing the calls. So now I'm using a platform called StreamYard, and that's going live to my Facebook page, or you could also watch it on YouTube live on my channel. So those are two ways of doing that. That seems to be a little bit more solid for some reason.
but will you be announcing upcoming ones on Instagram and I imagine on Facebook.
They're all announced on my Instagram page, and they're announced on Twitter and Facebook as well. So that's where I'm putting out the word.
Great. What else you got coming up?
Well, I'm in the midst of finishing up a bunch of records. One thing that happened this week is I had a drive that was going down, one of my drives, and it's always a nightmare for recording studios and especially like musicians who have too much on their plate anyway to back everything up properly anyway. So I had a drive failing, and I had to buy some new drives. I got a bunch of 8 terabyte drives, and I'm backing stuff up. Meanwhile, my drive failed, and I'm like, I just lost 4 terabytes of treasure. I'm sure I did. And I was sitting there yesterday, and all of a sudden the drive came on, and I was able to back it up before it died for real. So in the midst of all of that, um, after it was all backed up, I was going through this big drive with all this music on it, and I'm just seeing all this stuff that I've completely forgotten about. Just all kinds of amazing sessions that happened down here, duos and trios and solo stuff, and live concerts showed up, and stuff that goes back 10 or 15 years, videos, things like that. So I'm going to be seriously archiving and digging out a lot of stuff for release. So that's some of the stuff. The other thing that's coming up is I have an actual vocal album that's coming out probably next month at this point, and it's called Many Ways Around the Sun, and it's 10 songs. And yeah, I reached a period just uh, pandemic that I started writing vocal tracks, and I kind of had this itching for a while. I used to have a band called New Cultures, which was 3 singers, and we all shared our own songs and put that out as a band idea. But this will be the first time that I've done a solo record where I'm singing and playing all the instruments and stuff like that. And it's somewhat of a departure from what you know me for, with the crazy stuff. But really enjoying that process, and that album's done. We're just finishing up the packaging and stuff, and so I'm pretty excited about that because it's a new instrument that's coming back, and that's the voice.
So people will hear about this on Instagram and on your Facebook page and
Absolutely, yeah.
places too. Well, great. It's been great catching up.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah, it's terrific. Hopefully down the line we'll be able to see each other in person somewhere in
I hope so.
this country or another one.
We
Uh,
have to. We have to hang.